Hi, I'm Corinne from Ink and Nib Calligraphy, and today I'm going to be demoing how to use block inks. Now, for some people, this will be your first foray into using these type of inks, particularly for beginners where maybe you've used a little bit more of, say, Higgins Eternal ink or Sumi ink, your traditional black calligraphy ink. This is probably both exciting and probably a bit scary in equal measure, but actually they're very simple to use. So I'm going to spend a few minutes today going through that with you. Now, you don't need too much in terms of kit today. You can see on the left here, I've got my Coloro inks. This is their rainbow palette. There's some beautiful metallic colours in there. I've got a little pot of water just so I can clean my brush out. I've got a paintbrush. Now, this is only a very inexpensive paintbrush. I've got a set of them that I just use for this purpose. You don't need to spend a fortune. From the price tag, mine were £2.99. For about 10 of them, I think. And then the last thing that you need is your pen. So I've got my Moblique one here. I've just left it in the straight setting for quickness. And I've got my Blue Pumpkin, which is the Browse 361 nib, which I tend to favour. Now you'll notice here I've used some of my finished piece paper. You can see that it's a little bit textured there. This is watercolour paper. With the Coloro inks in particular, they do take quite a few different, or they take to quite a few different cards and papers. So actually you'll find that they're really useful for some of the cardstock actually where other inks bleed. So you will enjoy that as you use it. So let's get stuck in. So just out of shot, I'm just wetting the brush just there. Now I think I'm going to use this pink just there. So just rub that round. I'm going to wet my brush again. And it's still not quite damp enough. Do another dip, some more water and give it a good stir. And you'll see now it's starting to look a lot more inky. Let's just do one more for look. Here we go, that's a lot better consistency. Can you see how it actually looks like there's ink running in there? You can actually use normal watercolours. I've never done that, but somebody I know did and really surprised me. And then I found out these are actually watercolours. So you could use those for painting as well as for writing with. Who knew? So once you've got a reasonable consistency of your ink, so you can just see it moving around there. Actually, I might just use a tiny bit more. I've probably dipped my brush about 5 or 6 times just to get a reasonable consistency. You don't want it to be too thick, but you want it to be thick enough that it stays on the nib. You don't want to obviously make too much into it. So you can see as I brush that on the nib just there, that looks very similar to what would happen if you actually dipped your nib. Let's just rest that on there so it doesn't go anywhere. Now the first thing I like to do is to test it on a rough sheet just to make sure that it's not going to go anywhere. So I'll just do one line down. Have you noticed there how it won't come out? Sometimes it does that. I tend to go upwards with my nib and then down again. And again, it's still not going, and that tells me that I've not used enough water. So we'll use a little bit more. Paint that back onto our nib. Let's have another go. So we're just using it on our rough piece of paper first. There we go, it's much better. Now sometimes, depending on how much ink you've got on there, it can start to bleed, and I've had it drop onto nice pieces of card that I've been using. So I would always recommend for your first line, draw it onto a rough piece first so you can just check that it's working okay and it's flowing nicely. The other thing I really like about this ink is that actually, in comparison to how many times you have to dip when you're using things like your Sumi or your Higgins Eternal black ink, you don't have to dip quite as often. Now, the flip side of that is if you do use a one dip wonder, which you can get from Tom's Studio for your black ink, that's great. Unfortunately, you can't use it with these inks. So where it taketh away by you not being able to use the one dip wonder, at least you're not having to dip quite as often. Now, because I've been talking so much, I'm just going to do one last line just to check that I'm happy that that's still flowing. It's a good job I did, because it isn't. So that's the other thing to bear in mind. I'm just going to do one more. Pop a bit more on the brush there. Okay, so the nib is fully loaded. We'll just do one last test. There we go, that's better, isn't it? So now we will write on the proper card. So you can see here that you get a lovely, oh, it's doing it again, lovely thick downstroke and a lovely thin upstroke. And there you have it. So what do you think? Will you be using colour O inks from now on? Let me know in the comments.